to get things going. You have a great book, man, and I can't wait to show it to the code keepers. Yes,
Honor
sir.
is mine, good brother.
Good stuff. So, code keepers, as you can see, community conscious policing. We have the good brother Brandon. You know, they say let's go Brandon. They're talking about something else. We're gonna repurpose that. When we say let's go Brandon, we talking about him. We talk about let's go Brandon, and we talking about this brother, right? And so we're gonna deal with policing. We're gonna deal with Kemet. We're gonna deal with how we handle things and how you heal from trauma. And I know what you're saying, code keepers. You're like, yo, Seiko, how does this empower us? Well, stay tuned. All right, welcome to Get On Code, the Fly Guy Show, which is a series of melanated conversations focused on empowerment, health, wealth, and knowledge of self.
People think in binary choices because they are conditioned to.
And on the wall was a picture of a wolf and a lion. I think the wolf was the Democratic Party, the lion was the Republicans.
But the drug trade and all these illegal stuff that people do, that's still economics. It's just that they couldn't do it in a traditional system.
We're talking about melanated wealth.
So we can build wealth, but we just, for some reason, don't seem to be able to transfer it.
You had a great experience. Fine. That means nothing.
What were you told as a child about education? You had to be how many times better?
Every impression without an expression becomes depression.
Yes, sir. Code Keepers, we're on the line with the good brother Brandon Lee, co-founder of Training for Transformation. And let's start off, Brandon, man. Like I said, whenever you hear Let's Go Brandon, from now on, we're talking about this brother right here, right? Let's go, Brandon. Tell us about Training for Transformation, man.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on your platform. I have to begin in Oakland. We'll get into some stories that I guess got me into the work that I'm doing now as far as training, law enforcement, and police accountability. But Training for Transformation as a business began around 2014. At this time, Michael Brown, Ferguson, community uprisings were happening, nationwide. And I was an educator. I had students that were being impacted, and they didn't have anywhere to turn to. And unfortunately, a lot of them were flunking out of school. There were hate crimes happening on campus. There were all of these videos surfacing. For anybody from my generation, I grew up in the 80s in Oakland. We refer to it as the crack era growing up, but, reminiscing about it and those who survived it, now it's affectionately, turned the dope era and different. But coming through it, man, it was just drastic. And so for anybody from that generation or prior, we've seen the cycles of violence and how these things have typically gone. And so really to advocate for my students, we didn't even start the business. My plan was to be the president of a community college one day. But I knew that something had to happen. And I reached out to our local law enforcement in town, and we began a conversation. To their statistical data, they were not racially profiling in their precinct or department. But unfortunately, I had a stack of surveys from students who felt otherwise and had qualitative data. The only thing that was not contained, and that's where the training came in, was my students did not specify which police department had profiled them, and there's several in any district. So that allowed a conversation around training to come out. The law enforcement department, Corvallis Police Department, they did step up and receive, what we had to offer. But had I known or had their names in that qualitative data, more than likely, we would have just had a legal redress conversation, went right in straight to accountability. So we got our start around Oregon State University in Oregon.
Wow. I bet when you were having those conversations, the police departments were standing on the square that the community was the problem, that policing was not the problem. Would you agree?
Yeah, there's a few outdated, I'm thinking of the word meme, but outdated themes that you would hear tossed around. And certainly they were prevalent when I began. So for example, there's only a few bad apples. You can't convict the entire law enforcement profession or everybody in the department. But from an indigenous perspective, one rotten apple can spoil a bunch. So, whatever. So yes, there was a lot of pushback on community being involved in terms of training and community oversight. There was kind of a general understanding that, a community, because they were not law enforcement, right, didn't really have much to offer when it came to training and accountability. And of course, me going through what I went through coming out of Oakland and other experiences around the country, I felt differently.
And I'm still befuddled that we have so many FOBs, Fraternal Order of Police and Brotherhood of Police, who push that narrative. Hey, we're the professionals. We know what you're doing. We're not the problem. You're the problem. And if there's a few of us that are our problems, allow us to handle it. And even though we're not going to handle it, you should be okay with it because you're not us and we're the authority. And that's, and I think that's the crux of the argument. That's the crux of what you're doing with training for transformation. And we're going to jump right into some of the questions that I have because
Okay.
I think that we have some of the most highly trained professionals in law enforcement. I mean, they have military level weapons and weaponry. They have military training. They have some of the best technology for surveillance. So I personally don't think, and hopefully you can, prove me wrong. I personally don't think that training is the issue because they're some of the most highly trained individuals we have in America. So I guess my question is, will training end the problems that we've had with police violence?
In short, no. In short, no. Training alone will not change a culture of any field. However, I got this. I have to give honor and praise to the Coalition of Police Accountability and their director, Rashida Grenache, having a conversation with mentors and elders of grassroots-led organizations who have built on generations of those who come before me, including my own father, who kind of paved the way in this work. And training alone will not change the culture. However, training with the policies that are guided up and uplifted by people with lived experience who have been historically most impacted by law enforcement violence and racial inequities, if we are at the design table and able to include and integrate the policies that we want to see in our neighborhoods and communities, then the training and the policy, now you may have a foundation to build what we would consider community oversight of law enforcement or even community-led law enforcement training. But without policies, without investigating how budgets are allocated, without investigating hiring practices, without looking at basically every place where community and law enforcement connect and apply what we would refer to as a racial equity lens, meaning understand the power dynamics historically between law enforcement and, most importantly, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Without that comprehensive approach, no, training alone will not solve. And so what I'll just tell you a brief anecdote to kind of illustrate this. I was sitting on a statewide committee, and it was put together with all the higher ups. And I'm just a community member, a new father at the time, just trying to be of support in the place where I live. And I'm sitting around the room, and this committee will be developing the policies of how people like me will be policed. And around the room are academic researchers, there are police leaders, there are local politicians, some statewide politicians. But there wasn't anybody that I would consider to be from the community who would be impacted by the policies and things that we were talking about. I have to give honor to a gentleman by the name of Matthew Carr. We've never met, but he was an attorney, or is an attorney, that graduated from Vermont Law School. He somehow got a word of what we were doing, and he coined the phrase police community integrated training and education. And we refer to it as Psi. And so he highlighted training for transformation as a model example of what training could look like when power dynamics were switched, when it is community members of lived experience who design the curriculum of the training, when law enforcement come into a setting in plain clothes, no guns, and sit next to the people that they serve. The shift in power dynamics is what he uplifted. And from that, once I found that out, I'm sitting in this room, back to the story, and I'm looking at everyone in here, and I got my master's degree in teaching, my undergraduate degree in public policy and Spanish, not to mention what I've already done with NAACP and other volunteer organizations. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Policing, yeah, I am not a law enforcement. I'm not police. I'm not military. So much respect for those who put on a uniform and go and serve the community. Much respect if you're doing a good job. But when it came to community, integrated training and education, yeah, it hit me like a ton of bricks. There's nobody in this room more qualified than me in my firm when it comes to that. And so in the beginning, there was, I want to honor that there were leadership and law enforcement leaders who were, looking to get beyond scenario-based training. They wanted to get beyond the statistics. And typically these were the agencies with the highest level of accreditation and wanted to kind of push beyond what was kind of the normal status quo and embraced what we had to offer. So I have to uplift that, because if there weren't those from across the aisle to kind of accept our olive branch, this probably wouldn't have happened in the way that we did. So that's a little anecdote about how we kind of had to break down some barriers when it came to training in law enforcement. But I'm sure you'll start to see more and more of this style of approach, because quite frankly, there just are not any others on the table, which you have community policing, abolishment, and like what other options are there?
Yeah, I've had a chance to speak to a couple of the people involved in the abolitionist approach. And hey, I wanted to throw the gold bricks up there real quick. 1911 was a good year. It was truly a good year. And we shared 1911 together. Now, as a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, you guys started 1911 with your founding, and as a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, we ended it. So I jokingly say you started the fight, we ended the fight, but the fight was for improvement. It wasn't against each other.
Absolutely not. And even healthy competition has led to this day. And so any one of us who stand together in brotherhood and solidarity, we talk about people like Colin Kaepernick, and the sacrifice, at least professionally, that he made to stand on the issue regarding police brutality. There's a blueprint, that was handed down to us by brothers who were in, the worst of circumstances. What we were going through was just normal, not having access to their own, at least in our situation, right, not having access to campus activities or support, having to live far away from campus, not having housing, all of these different things that they had to overcome. So Colin Kaepernick, being a member of my fraternity brother, Kappa Alpha Psi, I completely understand the blueprint that I won't speak for you, my good brother, but I think all of us share this commitment and this obligation, that's bigger than us, passed down to us. And all I want to do and seek to do is be in alignment with those that came before us. So I do appreciate the shout out. Much love and respect to my 1911 brothers of Omega Psi Phi, and of course, any noobs that might be in the building.
Salute that. Salute that. One of the issues that I find when we're dealing with, policing is the challenge that policing, the effects and challenges that policing has left in our community. I meet with police officers. I ran for the school board. I do a lot of community work. I'm really involved with politics, and they're always, hey, we want to meet with the community. We want the community to meet with us. We want to do, and I'm like, nah. I mean, all the basketball games, all the cookouts, all the turkey giveaways in the world isn't really addressing some of the concerns. And I think one of the biggest concerns is when Joe Turner hurts another citizen, Joe Turner gets arrested and goes to jail. When Officer Friendly hurts another citizen, nothing happens, or things try to get covered up. And so when people saying that you guys hate police, we don't hate individual police, I don't believe. I think we really see that there's an inequity that needs to be addressed that the government seems to sanction. But one of the prevailing problems is because we feel this angst, because we feel this hurt, because we've had some abuses that have not been addressed, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen, And so, we're going to ask, how does one survive a police stop? But how does a community heal from police brutality? And I think you have the answer to that. So how do we heal from police brutality?
Absolutely. Fantastic question. And it's one that we work to address in our book. First, I want to kind of provide a little bit of not education as far as not wanting to insult anyone's intelligence, but just so that we have some shared language and understanding and framework for the conversation. So my business partner, Hoon Tang, she's also my wife, right? Mother of my kids. She was a refugee. She is a refugee from Cambodia. Ethnically, she is Chinese. Speaks the oldest dialect in China. So when we talk about native, indigenous, but they were the merchant class in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge genocide. And her family were forced to flee for their lives. And after a long journey, arrived in California when she was 7 or 8 and was raised from there. We met at the School for International Training. And the School for International Training is based on experiential learning. My major was Master of Arts in Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, international education. Hoon's focus was conflict transformation, peace building. And in her major, she was able to go back to Cambodia, back and reclaim her Khmer language and study the peace building process. And in her thesis, the art and reconciliation as it relates to multi-generational trauma. So those who were the descendants of the ones who operated as the oppressor in that situation, the descendants still live there. The victims of those who were slaughtered years later, they still live there. So the descendants of the oppressor and the descendants of the victims are still in the same place, but yet how do they find a way to work through their trauma and rebuild a shared vision of community? So I have to honor, this story because it's not my own, but the conflict transformation, what we gleaned was some international resources. So for example, Johan Galton, world-renowned peace builder, he has a simple triangle that'll help frame this conversation. And so he speaks about direct violence. That's what you and I see on camera way too often. George Floyd's, we know the names, we see the examples. This is where a lot of law enforcement will promote community policing. I'll get out my car, go meet the neighbors of the community, and then we'll build bridges, one at a time. Then you have structural violence. These are the policies and examples. So I'm in Oregon now. Oregon is the only state that I'm aware of that introduced state-based discrimination into its constitution. So the Oregon exclusion laws. There's a reason why there's not many Black people here in the state. And the first exclusion law was to lash any Negro, and I'm paraphrasing, but to lash any Negro found in this territory until they quit, right? Until they left. So this is an example of the structural violence, all of the segregation and policies that went into play after slavery to keep certain people down and the rest up. So a lot of times we'll have conversations, and I'm not here to, there's a spectrum when it comes to this work, and I've sat in just about every seat. Different departments have different solutions. So whether you're coming from abolishment or police reform or, refund, there's a spectrum that needs to, that I have to honor. Where we operate, and a lot of times these conversations happen only on the structural level, but rarely do I hear conversations on the level of cultural violence. It's the cultural violence. That's where the patriarchy, the colonized, the colonialism, that's where we are conditioned to basically become normalized. These situations that we see on TV with Black people getting killed and murdered by law enforcement, they become normalized. So if we don't get into patriarchy, toxic masculinity, if we don't get into the colonized and slavery and the wiping out of native peoples, if we're not scratching on the surface of that level, then we're not making any adjustments as far as the culture. So that's why it's not, especially depending on where you've been impacted, it's not wise to just go and sit down with law enforcement out the gate without some type of someone to craft and facilitate that space and prepare participants for what that encounter could look like. One thing that's most important that I would like to tease out and then lead this to your question as far as healing from police brutality, trauma. When police officers who, and I'll be clear, I am not equating what police officers go through with the historical trauma of people who are descendants of slavery, mass violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not assuming that they're the same. They're not. And it needs to be distinguished. But with that being said, if you look at any first responder and the rate at which they're getting called out, the pressures that are placed upon them, and the elasticity that's needed, not just for law enforcement, teachers, nurses, anyone in leadership has to be so elastic to fit the needs of everybody who needs their attention. If there's not a place for healing, if there's not a place to process these constant trauma-related issues, then I've got an officer who's probably dealing with a lot of trauma, probably higher rates at home of domestic violence. They're dealing with higher rates of their own health issues, you name it. And then I've got someone like myself. My dad died at 37 of hypertension and kidney failure. His brother did at 40 of the same. Their father, my grandfather, died at 53 of the same, hypertension and kidney failure. You think racism didn't have nothing to do with that, right? So now there's a police stop. And now I got this big ball of trauma walking up to my window. I'm already, in my mind, elevated, not just because of what I've endured, but for everyone who's come before me. That blood still flows through my veins. And
yeah,
now
trauma does.
If there's not someone like a community conscious policing to be able to provide some type of context to that engagement, very rarely, I mean, I'm sure more often than not, things happen where everyone leaves safely. But from an indigenous perspective, and I'll end on this point, we have to understand that from an indigenous lens, words can cause just as much of an impact as a bullet. We just don't stick around to see how those words manifest in our bodies. But it's evident when you look at the disparities and the racism in public health. It's obvious. And so when I do my trainings, we make it very clear that what people call microaggressions, are these little nicks that happen to us as people of color every day. They actually lead to an earlier mortality rate. It's taking life away from us. And the same thing with these officers. If they're not provided a safe place to process and heal from what they're going through and seeing, they're also. So it just dawned on me in the research that at some point, and you got to understand, I'm able to do this work because I found resolution and I found accountability out of some situations that happened to me that most do not. But that allowed me to be able to move forward. And as I looked at the research, I was like, dang, yes, we as Black people and BIPOC people are getting the short end of the stick, no doubt, but there's a connection between our mortality rates. So what if me living longer and more prosperous was connected to these police officers doing the same? And what if there's an understanding that we were interconnected? And that brings us to this pillar of ours, which is interbeing. So that's how, like an indigenous lens, we bring it into the work that we're doing in modern times. And it helps to contextualize our work in a way that is more natural for us. It is a paradigm shift.
All right. Okay. Interesting. I like the fact that you keep bringing up the term indigenous. So we're going to have to dive into that a little as well. I did ask earlier, well, I teased the question earlier, so let's go to class. Teach us, how does one survive a police stop? So I'm coming with my angst, my generational trauma. You know, they're coming with their situational trauma, dealing with the trauma that they've had because of their job and the things that are happening in their home. You're right. Police do have higher levels of suicide, of domestic violence, all the ills of the world. You can find, well, I don't want to say that because all means all. A lot of the ills in the world, you can find higher rates with our police officers. Um, I know how a police officer, there was a black police officer in Columbus, Ohio, that taught us how to survive a police stop because he knew what his compadres in Columbus, Ohio were doing. Columbus, Ohio still has a really, I don't want to call it evil. That might be going a bridge too far. It might be a step too far. But they have some insidious stuff in their police department that's been long standing for decades. But so this brother sat us down at one of the African-centered schools I attended and taught us how to survive a police stop. And I use those skills to today. How do you teach that we can survive police stops?
What a wonderful experience it sounds like. What I just want to uplift is, it sounds like, as you said, this took place at an African-centered school. So I just want to uplift the context in which you learned this information. So for me, it's not so much about the teaching someone about surviving a police stop, but rather the context, right? And that paradigm shift, which means centering us who have been historically most impacted by law enforcement violence. Coming from that understanding is way different than coming from a law enforcement centered perspective that wants you to know what they want you to know. So there's a few things that we offer. The first is that we can, I just make it clear every time that I am not an attorney. So I'm not offering legal advice and would offer that, would refer you to a service like Legal Shield or an attorney to get your legal questions answered. But we do teach what we would call in East Oakland, at least in my era, we refer to it as game, lessons learned only through experience. And so similar to what you shared, my big cousins, when I was writing my book, my aunt, my dad died when I was 9, but we're still like this. And when I wrote my book, my aunt said, "Boy, your daddy had us in his living room organizing us back in the 70s when he would work as assistant to the mayor to get the police tight back then." And I realized that, back to an indigenous lens, that I'm merely stepping into the work of my bloodline, bringing people together who may not otherwise come together. One of the things that, so now that we have a context and frame, right, you can see a lot of things with the same title, but if it's not coming with that frame, then you're probably going to get something different. The second understanding is that our rights in this country are for us to learn and exercise, meaning to trust that a law enforcement officer is going to know your rights as a citizen or as a resident, and then is going to adhere to those without you having to invoke them, is a fallacy. That's an illusion. So these are like steps to take before we even get to like, what are the actual things I need to know and quotes I need to say. Once we kind of work through there are simple exercises. I did not coin this, but one that has proven to be useful is SBNRR. It stands for stop, breathe, notice what's coming up in my body. What is it? Where is it? Where's it coming up? Where am I getting tight? Notice. Reflect, right? That reflection is on what I'm noticing, and then respond. So I took time to kind of like walk you through the process, but as you practice and role play, this process will happen like this. So when I get pulled over, I see those lights, or I see an officer, maybe I'm not even getting pulled, I just see a police officer, right? And I feel it. I feel it, right? Stop, Brandon. Stop, B. Stop. Breathe. Literally, breathe. Sometimes that's a step that I have to say, breathe, right? Notice. And what am I noticing is what I'm feeling based on what's happening to me right now? Or am I feeling me, my father, my uncles, my grandfathers, and all of that. And I need to kind of be able to work through that. Before I had an understanding of a trauma, man, I got pulled over, boom, I'm at you. I'm popping off out the gate. You know, in Oakland, they was knocking us down anyway. I mean, so you might as well go out standing on your 10 toes. I mean, that's how we was trained to get out. But again, finding accountability, being able to work through my own trauma, going through initiations to reconquer my own self. SBNRR is probably the first stop so that by the time I'm pulled over or I'm with that officer, I'm coming from a frame that's completely different. And really, I'm taking the responsibility to de-escalate this situation, quite honestly. So that's an example that I would offer. Of course, we go through, specific verbiage that you should know regarding your own rights. And you need to check this with your local state, counties, cities, make sure that it translates. But from my understanding, with all due respect, I refuse to answer any questions without my attorney present. With all due respect, I refuse to answer any questions without my attorney present. And that's just the course, so that there are certain things that you can do to just establish that you have an idea of what's going on. You are exercising your rights. And if they're violated, you just repeat these things for the redress later on. The final thing that I'll leave you with is that I don't go out unprepared. So I'm not here to promote any type of service, but there are, I'll just tell you, I keep Legal Shield. Legal Shield is an affordable, for some people, attorney service that has 24-hour access to attorneys, emergency access to an attorney. So I've actually been pulled over before and had my attorney on the phone, on speakerphone, before the officer even got to my window. So there's things that you can do even as a peace builder. I don't carry guns. I don't, there's certain values that I adhere to. But coming again from a Native perspective, being prepared for the invaders has always been something that we have had to, prepare for. And so the Legal Shield, knowing which laws apply to me, rehearsing, role-playing them so that under pressure, I'm ready to, spit them. And then most importantly, breathe, slow down, take a breath. And just as we're talking about this ancestral trauma, call on your ancestors who have already been through these circumstances, found ways to thrive under these pressures, right? And, you come from a place like that, most likely, it transcends any country, nationality, or race. However, if for some reason your rights are still violated, it will set you up for a proper redress, if you survive. And that's just real talk.
Wow. Yeah, that was really real talk. That was real talk. I appreciate that, brother. I really appreciate that. The first thing you dealt with is spirit. You said breathe. And, I won't go into the metaphysics of that. I think you can go a lot deeper than I can. Being involved with the MTAM School of Kemetic Philosophy and Spirituality. All right. Do the knowledge, man. Tell me about this, brother. Tell me about this.
I'll remove my hat for this conversation. I have to give honor and praise to Prophet Neb Naba Lamusa Moadenabig. He is recognized as a high priest of the Dogon of West Africa. For those who may not be aware, the ethnic group of the Dogon, they tended to the spiritual matters of Pharaoh in ancient Egypt. We refer to Egypt as Hej Bata, and we refer to the land of Africa as Merita, the beloved land. He rose as a young high priest, meaning he went through his initiations. The Dogon are credited for astronomy and, pretty much any science you can think of. It was important, number one, to begin with this because what was very important about at the time when he was living, Master Naba, was that he also was trained in Western colleges. He spoke English. And so he got the permission of the elders and the priests and said, and I'm paraphrasing my understanding, but basically, without our knowledge and teachings of self, and how we relate to the cosmos, we got some brothers and sisters in the West who are lost and who want to re-know and reconquer themselves. And he gained permission to be able to open initiation up to include people like myself in the United States who wanted to work to reclaim myself but didn't have access to these temples. So he started the Earth Center, the first in Chicago in 1996. And what was most important, I can't say most important, so many things are important. But one of the things that he brought out, and it's the first page of my book, and it's the first page for a reason, is the code of human behavior. The first code of human behavior that I'm aware of. So when we're speaking on the topic of law and order, it was very important for me to make it known to those that I work with that the concept of law and order was taught to humanity by very dark-skinned Black people in Africa. So the concept that people of color don't have some connection or understanding of law and order, and therefore we are like more apt to crime and, you know, at higher rates in prison is ludicrous because, you know, we are the descendants of those who introduced law and order to the world. So that's the context that we wanted to begin with. And had Master Naba not brought this knowledge out of the initiation camps of the Bush to the United States, then we really would have no hope in terms of reclaiming and reconquering ourselves. So Kim philosophy and spirituality is stems from the Dogon. And to just boil it down to one theme, we work in community conscious policing to apply life-preserving principles. In indigenous communities, I doubt you'll find a prison or a jail or a concept of such. But how do we apply life-preserving principles in these modern day times? And that's the connection of why we had to do it through a Kim philosophy and spiritual lens.
All right. Hey, man. Code Keepers, we're getting deep. We're getting deep. I'm holding the book. It's a great read. I'm telling you, it's, you know, this will take you maybe about 4 days, you know, about 4 days. The good brother Brandon Lee, and he wrote community conscious policing. Community conscious policing, not conscious community policing, because we do need to police the conscious community.
Yeah.
I shaded that. But this is about dealing with the boys in blue. Community conscious policing. And you can pick up his book. I got it from Amazon. You can get it from Amazon or your local melanated bookstore. You know, I favor in the Hampton Roads area Positive Vibes African Literature. But there's some other great ones in D.C. and Oakland. I know some great ones as well. So, you know, pick it up from your melanated bookstore. And I kind of want to go down the Kemetic rabbit hole. You know, I'm a Hotep at heart, man. I'm a Hotep at heart. I say that. I said earlier that you're involved with the Prince Hall Masons, the Prince Hall Shriners, Scottish Rites Masonry, and Kappa Alpha Psi, and this mystery school you just described about. How does it all fit together? And, you know, I just had a conversation earlier with the good brother, the Chakra Doctor, and he was like, yo, you in a fraternity, man. Are you involved in evil? You know, y'all doing evil? Y'all trying to rule the world? Y'all the boule? And I was like, that ain't us. That might be them, but that ain't us. In other words, our organizations, our Divine Nine organizations, are not involved with some of the rituals and activities that Skull and Bones and Trilateral Commission and some of those other organizations are involved in. So tell us a little bit, you know, very quickly, you know, Prince Hall Masons, Prince Hall Shriners. I hadn't heard that one before. Scottish Rites Masonry, familiar with. Of course, you know, the salute to the good brothers, Kappa Alpha Psi. And you also just discussed your mystery school. So hit us up on, you know, do the knowledge on Princess Hall Masons and Princess Hall Shriners as it relates to this.
Absolutely. So kind of the bullet point list, I had the honor and privilege to, I think nowadays they say initiate. I pledged Kappa Alpha Psi my freshman year. You know, it was elder brothers who saw how I took to it, right? And how I upheld the shield, or did my best to uphold the shield, and kind of pull my coattails and to say, you know, listen, the journey isn't over. The rabbit hole is deep. It's for those who want to seek, you know, honest seekers. And after a few years, you know, I lost my father at 9. Like I said, spiritually remained, you know, really tight. But I was motivated to discover more. So that led me, you know, I attended at Baylor University, Xi Sigma chapter, executive style Noops as far as Kappa. But Texas is where my grandparents are from. My grandfather graduated from Prairie View A&M University, HBCU. So I discovered Prince Hall Freemasonry. And when I discovered Prince Hall Freemasonry, it was like a whole veil had been lifted off. And I had to go look at my own fraternity during different light. You know, one thing that shares a lot of our Divine Nine, as far as fraternities and sororities, is that many of our founders were indeed a part of Prince Hall Freemasonry for the men and the Order of Eastern Stars for the women. So when I discovered this brother by the name of Prince Hall, if you're not aware of him, definitely go do your own research. But I was elected as the first grand historian of Prince Hall in my area of Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. But I was raised a Prince Hall Mason in Texas. And so I say Oakland raised, Texas made. So Prince Hall was regarded or is regarded as a Black founding father of this country, of the United States of America. He was posthumously recognized as such by the Cambridge City Council. He has a monument near Harvard University giving honor to him as an American revolutionary patriot who fought in the American Revolution. He did everything from opening the first, I can't say the first, but probably the first public school for Black children that started in his home and then moved to the Masonic Lodge. So a lot of times publicly, who takes the credit, and rightfully so, is the church or even the mosque. But a lot of times there were Prince Hall Freemasons who consisted of the same members who met in the same buildings, and they were the pillars of our neighborhoods and communities. And so you can find out a lot more about Prince Hall Freemasonry. I could go on for days, but without the knowledge of Prince Hall, all Divine Nine, as far as I'm concerned, in one way, shape, or form, are descendants, meaning that Prince Hall Freemasonry began in, let's see, some give it credit for 1775. More recent research, shout out to John Hairston, says 1778. But regardless, got internationally established 1784, and that is, understood. So from 1784 to say Kappa Alpha Psi in 1911, a lot happened. And so when I discovered Prince Hall Freemasonry and this brother named Prince Hall, who had done all this in Boston, writing letters, the brother was just doing things so he definitely was an inspiration and let me know and confirmed, based on what I saw in my grandparents, the Native Americans in my family, that no, the work that we were doing was a continuation of people who had come before us, and shout out to, of course, the original Black Panther Party of self-defense in Oakland, and similar movements for other genres, for other communities. But without Prince Hall, just like without Master Naba, Prophet Naba, there would be no road to follow, in our time of need right now. And without understanding and knowing who they are, we also can be contributing to causing harm simply by not even understanding the contributions of people like Prophet Naba and Prince Hall.
I say that. I do a presentation, or I used to do a presentation. I haven't done it in decades. As a matter of fact, you can find that presentation on YouTube, The African Origins of Fraternities and Sororities. I did this back at Norfolk State University back in 1997. I used to do this presentation for the bros. This particular presentation that I videotaped here was done for the good brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha. But yeah, we get into the roots of our Divine Nine organizations and how they're connected with Masonry and with Prince Hall and things of that nature. So I'm glad that you're able to highlight that. And what's interesting is when we talk about solving the problems of police, we don't talk about Prince Hall and Kemet, but you do. You, in your book, in the first pages, you talk about the motherland, the traditional motherland, Kemet, and it really blew my mind that to find the information that we studied in our African-centered schools of thought, from wherever they came from, that you brought that into addressing problems that we're having with the judicial system. And that just kind of blows my mind, you know. So I want to ask this question as kind of our last question. And, you know, we're talking with the good brother, Brandon. So let's go, Brandon. So every time you see "Let's Go, Brandon," we're talking about this brother. We're talking about him. All right. But Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, you know, what should we be doing about these types of situations? What can be done about these types of situations?
First, giving honor and praise to the ancestors, no matter their age. Anyone who passes transitions before we are considered to be the ancestors. So much, just want to send out condolences and prayers, to those families who continue, to deal with the loss of loved ones. But with that being said, I have to honor that there's a spectrum, depending on your law enforcement. Law enforcement has different levels of accreditation. Law enforcement tracks different information on their officers. Some track more than what's required. Some track the bare minimum. So there's no one size fits all. I'm someone that's about the process. Community conscious policing is a process. So whether you're about abolishment or refunding or police reform, regardless of the conversation, if it's not done without the people who are most impacted by law enforcement violence and, white supremacy culture, racial inequities at the design table, then you will be contributing to the problem, period. So there are cases, in Oakland. I deal with Oakland, there was a time when abolishment, for sure, there's a time to have that conversation, and I want to just take that. That's outside of law enforcement. I'm about to take my son out of school and train him myself next spring semester. This is real talk. If you're not upholding the standard, you will become obsolete. And these are based on indigenous laws and universal laws and nature-based principles, right? That I know you understand. So I have to lead with that, because if certain companies, law enforcement departments, et cetera, do not do what's necessary to make this paradigm shift in the 21st century, then they will become obsolete one way or another. Now, what I will say about Oakland is that we had a strong grassroots community, that we all have our respective things, but when it came to police brutality, we were able to unite into a coalition. That's huge. We also stood on the shoulders and the work of those who had come before us, right? We weren't recreating something new. If you remember back in Oakland, when you talk about the Panthers, it wasn't just a militancy. You had to go learn some Swahili. You had to go change your name and identify under a different consciousness. I mean, there was some education involved. So those are the things that I would consider to be we are a public health response model to ending unnecessary law enforcement violence. So that means calling on the strengths of the community to solve our own problems, so that if there is crime, that they can go focus on that. But the infrastructure needs to be provided for a community to be able to serve its own solution. So I'll give you a quick anecdote, and then I'll end with this. In 1994, I was walking through a parking lot, West Oakland, going to see some family, and 6 cars, police cars, came in back to back, boom, 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 boom. 2 in each car, jump out, guns pulled, get on the ground, get on the ground. Whoa, I'm 14, I go to private school. I don't know anything about this life, man. I hit the pavement. I can still taste the dust and all of that stuff. To make a long story short, because that ordeal took a couple of hours, it was my cousins, my family, who got word. This before social media and all that, cell phones, got word of what was happening. I hadn't arrived to my destination. And so they found me and they got to me, and they didn't break any laws, but they did what they had to do to get me free without being physically harmed. And that's when I understood that while law enforcement has the force, all the things that you named, the power is, and always will remain with the people if we choose to exercise it. And so that memory is what stuck into my mind. So to answer your question, what should be done? There's a lot of changes that could be done in police. But coming from a Ken perspective, we are builders, which means I don't destroy, I don't dismantle, I don't take away. I'm into building. And in Oakland, when this happened to me, fast forward 15 years, still working on the same issue, going through my initiations, working on myself, but I connected with the Coalition of Police Accountability, led by Rashida Grenaz and a whole lot of other folks. And we worked to defund, meaning take the 1.4 million plus budget from internal affairs of Oakland and use it to fund our community oversight of law enforcement board. And that community oversight of law enforcement board, thanks to Measure LL in 2016, it became strengthened and it became a lot more teeth to bring accountability. And now, in my opinion, it's one of the strongest in the nation. So it took decades, right? But transformation is possible. Healing is necessary. And this is kind of the mud that community conscious policing was birthed out of. So solutions may vary, but what I would say is I would put all of my energy and focus on empowering the community to step up, educate, and bond together to see what shared vision of community that they want to see and make those demands accordingly. And lastly, don't sacrifice our value system in order to do it.
Hey, we're learning and earning and building with the good brother Brandon. Let's go, Brandon. Good brother Brandon Lee, author of Community Conscious Policing, a guide for people's justice and law enforcement solutions. So if we're looking for the solution, it's already written. It's already written. Hey, brother, how does this empower us? Last question.
Fantastic question. I'm so glad that you asked. This empowers us, again, just to recap a little bit of our conversation. Law and order, we are the descendants of those who taught humanity. Number two, I describe in my book with the importance of initiation. So one thing I think that is necessary is that we invest in the institutions that got us here, that preserved us to be here. So I don't claim my organizations to be perfect and that there's nothing wrong with them. That's not what I'm professing. But the reason why I participated in NAACP, Kappa Alpha Psi, Prince Hall Freemasonry, and now paying homage and reconquer myself through the initiatic process with the Earth Center. These are, it's my way of paying homage to those who sacrificed so much for me to even be here to do this work. And without going through these, as we discussed, my good brother, going through these initiatic camps that were established by us, for us, we're simply lost in time and space. So that's how I would say it empowers us. The policing, you'll get 33 recommendations at the end that are very applicable. You'll get case studies of real racial profiling incidents that have occurred to me, how we redress them, ideas on how to, you need to heal from them. There are healing exercises in them. Shout out to Resma Menakem, author of My Grandmother's Hands, that inspired us to include actual healing exercises, Kim healing exercises in the book. But ultimately, this empowers us to help us revisit and reconquer and remind us of who we truly are. And if we stand in that ancestral spirit, everything around us has no choice but to yield.
No weapon formed against us shall prosper.
Facts.
Ashe. Ashe. The Unitarian Church. You're part of the Unitarian Church?
I am. Quick bit on that. I was raised Church of Christ, so I want to honor where I came from. My father was Baptist, graduated from Houston Baptist University. So, no denomination beef. But as far as my value system today, having gone through, some aspects of Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhism, he's the one who introduced mindfulness to the West, and a lot of my other just initiations and worldwide travels, the Unitarian Church more fit my family values of where we are today. And not only that, they embraced me, my family, and community conscious policing to where we were able to lead a police accountability team. there. So yeah, have to recognize First Unitarian Church of Portland and the broader universalists for their support of our mission.
I say that. I spend a lot of time with one of the Universalist churches, Unitarian churches, I think.
That's right.
I get the two mixed up because they're solely closely aligned. Right. I help them with one of their annual Kwanzaa celebrations. Little known fact is that the Universal Unitarians or Universal Universalists, I mix it up.
Thank you for your help. I do the same. No disrespect. Yeah.
Right. They gave a grant to Milana Karinga and the US organization, and that grant helped fund the research that helped them to formulate Kwanzaa, the celebration. So it's kind of interesting that the church that you're associated with, the church you're associated with, helped fund the early stages of the Kwanzaa celebration. So
That's a
I
great
say to that. Hey, Code Keepers, I want you to check out the book, Conscious Community. I keep saying it because the conscious community does need policing.
That's right.
Too many pedophiles. But his book, Community Conscious Policing, and pick it up, A Guide for People's Justice and Law Enforcement Solutions. Good brother, I really appreciate having you on Get on Code. Code Keepers, use this to empower you. Use this technology. This book is technology. It's a technology, right? Use this technology to go forth and make the changes that need to happen in our world, in our community, in our nation. Because we have a lot to work on, and that helps us, that strengthens us, that gives us the empowerment we need, the technology we need to make those moves. Good brother Brandon Lee, thank you for all you're doing and training for transformation.
Thank you so much for having me. And for anybody who was able, please leave us a positive book review. That'd be greatly appreciated. Much love and respect.
Yeah, buy the book. Leave a positive book review. Peace.
Peace and blessings.
All right, brother.